Welcome to everyone. I think we're going to get started. Help yourself to iced tea. Welcome to those here at Bennett Martin Library in Lincoln, and those of you in cyberspace. We appreciate you joining us. Tonight, I think you're in for something very special, a discussion of Cheyenne Autumn, which is Sandoz's, one of her incredible 20 books that she authored. And we've chosen to talk about that tonight. She began her research on this book in 1939, but it did not get published until 1953, finally by McGraw-Hill. It was rejected by several publishers, maybe 4 or 5, that didn't believe that you should write in that way, in that fashion, in that form. But it did receive many accolades, and it sold very well. And as you know, the book stresses the heroism of the fleeing Cheyennes, their idealism and their view of life. And I think one of the strengths of the story is the telling of the everyday Indian village life and customs. And through her incredible research and her knowledge and of speaking with the elders is how she gained this. She used Indian perspectives and Indian language patterns, which makes it even more authentic, I think, in reading it. Now, tonight we have a very special guest, Gerry Robinson, raised at the heart of the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation in Montana. And he grew up hearing fragmented stories about his ancestors as well. He's devoted nearly 20 years of his life to researching, traveling the country, and reaching back through time to reclaim his heritage. He is a published historical writer and member of the Western Writers of America. His debut novel, The Cheyenne Story and Interpretation of Courage, is the first installment of a 3-volume series, compelling presentation of Northern Cheyenne history shared by him, a member of the tribe and a direct descendant of those involved. It was published in 2019. He did research part of it at the Mari Sandoz High Plains Heritage Center in Chadron, as well as Nebraska Historical Society, I believe. And it has won a prestigious award from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, the Wrangler Award for the Best Western Novel in 2020. Also, the Wyoming Historical Society called it their Fiction Book of the Year last year. I read it, it's fabulous, I highly recommend it. I also want to thank the library for having us, and I want to point out to some of you who may or may not know that on the 3rd floor we have the Heritage Room of Nebraska authors. Diane Wilson, the curator, is here, I think. But in there you will see many works by over 4,000 authors. And what I thought was interesting, Diane shared with me, of course, Sandoz spent a lot of time in Lincoln, 1919 to 1940. And she spent time in the Lincoln City Library, not this one, obviously, in the 20s and 30s. And so every book she published, she signed a first edition and sent it to the library and dedicated it to the Lincoln City Libraries and thanked them for her time that she was able to work here. For those of you on Zoom tonight, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. Gerry will talk for a while and then we will have questions and answers. So we will try and watch the chat box for that afterwards, as well as the old-fashioned way of those of us person to person, we could just raise our hand. Gerry, welcome.
Would run into this. So what do we do?
Oh.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank the Mari Sandoz Heritage Society, the Bennett Martin Library, Francia Finch, for the offer to do a book signing there today, and thank all of you for coming today. It's quite an honor for me to be standing before you and to be asked to present on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'll start with a little introduction of who I am, where I'm from, a little bit about my background. I was talking earlier this evening about how a lot of my writing is along the same style as, well, not necessarily the same style, but certainly the same spirit as Mari Sandoz. And so it just means a lot to be able to be here with you tonight. So I was born and raised on the reservation, the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I'm one of 10 children, 8th out of 10. And I like to say I was raised at the heart of the reservation and literally smack dab in the center of the reservation. Highway 212 and Highway 39 cross, and we lived right there at the intersection of both highways. And initially, for the first 5 years of my life, I was raised in a little 2-room shack. At that time, there were 8 kids and the 2 folks. No running water. We did have electricity. I always like to tell people I was trained on a 2-seater and I'm not talking bicycle. So really born and raised at the heart of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I am the product of 3 generations of boarding schools. My grandmother, Gertrude Parker, went to the Fort Shaw military boarding school in Fort Shaw, Montana. My mother went to Flandreau boarding school in South Dakota, and then I graduated from St. Labray boarding school in Ashland, Montana. So I have had the experience of having a lot of my history and my culture taken away even before I came along. And it's been a big part of my life to try to, as I say in the book, reach back through time and try to reclaim some of that. It's there's a lot of it that I was raised in the middle of. I mean, when you're raised on the reservation, you just cannot get away from the culture. I mean, it just develops you and all. But we were taught from an early age that it wasn't okay. And so there's a lot of struggle going and has been within me for a long time over that. And it took moving away from the reservation before I kind of came to terms with that and realized that the further away I got, the more homesick I got. And so it became more and more important for me to reach back, plug in, and learn a little more about who I was, where I came from, who I came from. And this story has always been at the heart of that for me. My heritage can be traced back, or I can trace it back to a Southern Cheyenne man named Frog, who was a good friend of the Southern Cheyenne chief Black Kettle. Frog was killed while on a horse raiding, or out on a horse raid with Black Kettle back in the mid-1850s. And but he was, prior to that, he did attend the horse retreat at Fort Laramie, which is where my great-great-grandfather, Bill Rowland, who is one of my protagonists in the book, met Frog's daughter, Sis Frog, and they married in 1950. They had 11 children, one of whom was Alice Jane Rowland, their eldest daughter. She was my great-grandmother, and Alice Jane married a man named Charles Parker, and they had half a dozen kids, one of whom was my grandfather, Guy Parker, and then Guy Parker married my grandmother, Gertrude. Laurence, who is actually Métis, Chippewa Creek French mixed blood, up in Choteau, Montana. She's a member of the Teton Canyon River Band of Métis. And they had 6 kids as well. One of whom was my mother, Joanne. And then I get some Lakota and Cheyenne from my father's side as well. My great-grandfather, Dave Robinson, was one of the first deputy sheriffs in the Black Hills area of Rapid City. And he married a Lakota Cheyenne woman, Jenny Brown, and the lineage went down through a large family. I lose track on that side a little bit. We come through the Harrises and Spangs on that side, the Lakota and the Cheyenne side on that side. So I've got a pretty good mix of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Métis, about just a little under half, and then the rest is English and Irish primarily. So that's a little bit about my lineage. It's something I've just learned to do on the reservation growing up. It's a practice that's intended to help people know how I might be related to you, how we're connected. So I will say that I have no relation to Levi Robinson, who Fort Robinson is named after. I made the mistake of asking my sister Vonda one time if there was any relation, and Fort Robinson is kind of a somber place for the Northern Cheyenne. So she made a point of letting me know that no, we're not related to that Robinson. But I was raised with bits and pieces of the story my entire life. I actually played with my cousins in the hills in Muddy Creek on the reservation, where Little Wolf was buried for the first time standing up. And we moved when I was 5 to the agency side of Lame Deer and lived about a quarter mile where Little Wolf was buried for the second time, laying down next to Morningstar. The story, I first started to learn the story just from aunties and uncles and all. I didn't, actually, I saw the movie before I read the book. It was the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater. There's a small little movie theater, Tuck Theater in Ashland, Montana. And it was my first trip into a theater, smelling the popcorn and seeing the big screen and all of that. And I remember walking out there very proud, very impressed that they would make a movie about my people, the tribe that I belong to. I didn't realize until years later, and I actually got in and had a chance to read the book and then see the movie again, what a bad movie it was. And then I watched it again later on in life after I had been doing a lot of research and actually got a little angry at different points. And it's kind of reassuring to find out that Mari Sandoz felt the same way about certain parts of that book. So, but when I did read the book, it was very eye-opening for me. It really planted a seed of curiosity. Like I say, I'm a product of 3 generations of boarding schools. I grew up with very strict rules, at least. Well, we didn't speak Cheyenne or really follow much of any tradition in the household. But when you went to school, not only did we not do that, we were prohibited from doing it if we tried. And those around me who were raised in a more traditional home were oftentimes punished and ostracized, and it was a bit baffling and troubling to see that. And again, it gave me the message that there's a part of me that's not right, that's not okay. And so when I read Cheyenne Autumn, I realized there's another side to that story. And that was really, in many ways, my first, my parents and relatives would all tell me, we're proud Cheyennes, and all of that. But to actually have that in a book, and to have the story and the tradition and the culture there in black and white, and having it all lifted up the way that she lifted that story up, lifted me up as well. So it's always been near and dear to my heart. I came to writing late in life. I actually did not get a degree until my mid-30s. I was in and out of college for quite some time. I started writing creatively in the early 2000s. I published some poetry, some short stories. I published several nonfiction articles online and in journals. I like to say that my style is different than Mari Sandoz. I don't quite write the same style that she does. I think she's pretty unique in how she does what she did. But I do write in the spirit of Sandoz. I felt that from the very beginning, before I even read that the spirit of Sandoz is used quite often on the webpage for the Heritage Society. When I read that, I thought, oh, they get it too. There is a spirit of Sandoz. And by that, what I mean is that it's very important for me to do the research, to pull in all that history, to try to understand it as best I can, to get all the information, and to interpret that information from a Cheyenne perspective. And again, being born and raised on the reservation, not being raised traditional, but certainly being immersed and embraced by the culture. I feel that I can bring a strong Cheyenne perspective to the story. And I for those of you that have read the book, I hope that that's what you walk away feeling, is that I do have a decent grasp of the Cheyenne heart. And that's what I try to write from, is the Cheyenne heart. Many times before I write, when I sit down, particularly if I'm going to be writing about a particularly difficult situation, I will pray. I will smudge and I will pray and I'll ask for the words, and then I'll just sit with it for a moment. And I will put down what comes to me, and more than likely, a couple weeks later, I'll come back and rewrite the whole thing again, which is typical writer protocol. But I try to put my heart in the right place and try to open up for that. And I'm sure that that's what Mari did as well. In order to capture the Cheyenne perspective, you have to listen to a Cheyenne heart. And I think that that's what she did with certainly being a child of the plains and being around this culture all her life growing up. So I try to interpret it from a Cheyenne perspective, and then I try to relate it to the readers as best I can. utilizing a creative palette, which again is what Mari did. I know that there was that she faced a lot of we'll call it opposition about whether or not she wrote history or not. I believe she did. She just wrote it from a creative palette, and I think that's what she said time and time again, that it's possible to do that. That's what I try to do in my book, is I do take a bit of creative license. For me, it's important that I recognize those areas, that I let the reader know I'm doing that, because I want them to be able to trust the history that I do with the actual history that I do present to them. And so I try to remove any doubt, any question as to whether or not this really happened. If it didn't, if it's something that I'm bringing in to help me do a better job of telling the story from a Cheyenne part, I will point to that and I'll say that that's what I'm doing. For instance, there are two characters in my book that that are real people who lived during that time. I changed their ages. Date Woman, who is Little Wolf's daughter, and Gathering His Medicine, who is the son of Iron Tooth Woman. I raised Date Woman up in age, and I lowered Gathering His Medicine in age to put them roughly in the early preteen, early teen ages. And I do that for a specific reason, because I feel that it's very important. That's a part of the story that's not been told. The effect that this whole experience had on that generation of Cheyenne people, the youth. Intergenerational trauma is a real thing, and I think that it's important to begin telling that story to aid the understanding of what that looks like in the time, and how that could easily be carried on to subsequent generations after that. I've seen that on the reservation. I've experienced that myself growing up. It is a real thing. And this is where those initial effects were felt. And so I needed to have those vehicles, if you will, to tell that story, those vessels to tell that story. And so that's why I changed the ages. That's the creative aspect that I brought, one of the creative aspects that I brought to my telling of the story. And I believe that is indeed in the spirit of Sandoz. She does bring a lot of the creative aspect to this story. So in many ways, we are a lot alike in our writing spirit. Again, I don't think my style is the same. I don't use as poetic a language as she does. Being raised on the reservation, and it might be a generational thing, but I've learned that her phrasing of the Cheyenne language is a lot different than a lot of the phrasing that I was raised with. So I will structure my sentences differently than how she did. I will refer to people. I refer to people differently than the way she did. Again, it's a different style, but I think the spirit is the same, and that's where I drew a lot of my inspiration from when I sat down to write the book. Essentially, this is the first of 3 volumes that I will be writing, and it's essentially the same story that Sandoz tells in Cheyenne Autumn. It's just that I unpack that and stretch it out over 3 novels, and I do so. She packs a lot of history into that book. I'm sorry, I left my copy over there in the briefcase. She packs a lot of history into that book, and at times it can be a little befuddling when you even for me, to go in and read through and find this person here and read about them there, and they're doing something different over here, and I'm trying to connect the dots and all. So what I try to do is stretch that out, give the characters a little room to breathe. I can't accuse Sandoz of bringing in too many characters, because I've been accused of the same thing in my book. I think I have a list of characters. There's 70 some in there, and it was one of the first things that my editor came back to me with was, "Are you sure you want to have this many people in there?" And I told her, "Well, I'm writing about a tribe, so I think we got to have a tribe in there." And you know, I'm not going to do this token Indian thing. We're writing about families, relatives, and generations here. So, and I'm sure Sandoz I know uses twice that many people in one book, in just one. It's not a thin novel, but it's not a real thick novel either. So there's a lot that she packs into it. Just real quickly, another example of where I utilize a little creative license in the book is in my telling the story of Bill Rowland's involvement, my great-great-grandfather. When I was a child growing up, we were at the old family cemetery where Bill Rowland was buried, and my father was pointing out the different relatives, the graves were sunken in, and the markers were pretty much gone. He was just doing it by memory. And I asked the question that I think most typical young children would ask, was I related to anybody who was famous back in that time? And he said, well, your Grandpa Rowland was a scout, I think, back during that time. He didn't know any more about it at all. That was it. That was all I knew about my Grandpa Rowland, until I found him in a history book. And actually, one of the first was in Cheyenne Autumn. She mentions the interpreter Rowland. If you dig deeper, he's mentioned in a lot of the military diaries. Billy Garnett, a famous Lakota scout, mentions him a lot. He was one of the best sign talkers of that time. And in the book, he is one of the first tutors for Lieutenant Philo Clark in Indian Sign Language, and Garnett makes that claim in one of his interviews. And so it's very important that I included him interacting with Lieutenant Clark in that way. One of his where I found him in history was after this battle in the Big Horn Mountains. They call it the Dull Knife Battle or the Red Fork Battle. I prefer to call it the Red Fork. No disrespect to Dull Knife at all. But when you call it the Dull Knife Battle, that suggests that Dull Knife was the principal chief at the time, and it was noted, and Sandoz notes it as well, that it was actually Little Wolf's camp that was rated on that day, and not Dull Night. And actually, if you will allow me, I prefer to use Morning Star because Morning Star is the Cheyenne name. And that's how I refer to him in the book. But getting back to Bill Rowland, I first found him in a history book after this battle took place, and he was led up to the base of a mountain where the Cheyenne had fled after their camp had been attacked. And he did what he was brought there to do, which was to translate between the Cheyennes on the mountainside and the military next to him, military personnel next to him, to try to get the Cheyenne to surrender. And they would not. And that incident is recorded in several different spots throughout in several different diaries and military records. So he was there, he did his job, but there's not one word of how he felt about that. And this is a man who had been married into the tribe for 26 years, and he had just come up a ravine where there were young Cheyenne men laying dead in front of him, who he had seen raised from infancy. And not one word about how he felt. And I have a whole chapter written about that experience. The Cheyenne word for it is "Uhumatatsa." He felt guilty. And, excuse me. So I write from Cheyenne heart. And I feel very strongly that that's exactly what Mari Sandoz did as well. I try to present a balanced perspective in my writing. If you read the book, I alternate perspectives between Bill Rowland, who's writing with the military. He found himself, after being married into the tribe for 26 years, riding with the military into the main camp of the Northern Cheyenne, knowing that they're going to wipe it out. I take his perspective, and then I take in first person, and I take Little Wolf's perspective in third person. And I play back and forth between the two. And I do that for a reason, because there are, even among the Cheyenne who tell this story, there are so many different perspectives of what happened where, who was involved, who did what. So just that experience of bouncing back and forth between Bill Rowland and Little Wolf, I hope to give the reader an opportunity to understand that there are many different ways of looking at this. Not only this battle, but this time period. And so I introduced Bill Rowland and his relationship with Lieutenant Clark. And I introduced Little Wolf, his relationship with Morning Star. They each have other characters that they interact with. Some have good intentions, others not so good intentions. Well, I think if you would ask them, they would say they were good intentions, but they didn't turn out so well. For instance, last one, who's a character in the book who, because of his arrogance, delays the tribe leaving this camp when they know that the military is very likely to be coming up and attacking at some point soon. There's a great quote I found from the Lakota chief Red Cloud after a little dust up that took place down near the first Red Cloud agency on the Laramie. Was it no? On the Platte. And there's a little dust up between his men and some military. And the officer came to him and wanted Red Cloud to punish his men for taking part in that episode. And Red Cloud told him there were fools on both sides. And I took that to heart. It's whether, no matter which side of this story you're on, there are heroes and there are fools. And it's when you recognize that and then bring the two sides together, you have a much more balanced, a much better understanding of what really transpired. And that's what I hope to bring to that book and to the rest of the series. This is one thing, one place where I feel I so appreciate what Mari Sandoz did for the Northern Cheyenne and for that understanding that she gave me, that it's a good thing to be a Northern Cheyenne. That's a good thing. It's something to be proud of. And I come from very strong, resilient, heroic people. But at the same time, there were mistakes made on the Cheyenne side. And there were not too wise people on the Cheyenne side. I think Sandoz, in some of her writing, glosses over some of that. And I think that in that sense, that it is time to take some of that gloss off. Very slowly, very carefully, respectfully, and try to show more realistically what happened on the Cheyenne side. Little Wolf is portrayed as being almost sagacious, somewhat wise, somewhat profound in his approach to things, but he had a temper. That man had a temper, and it brought him trouble throughout his life. And I think Sandoz does present that, but I think that it can be presented a little more clearly as well. And I think that there are events that take place during the book, particularly around Overland, Kansas, that need to have a little more closer look taken. So, and I'll get into that in a bit. But something that brings me to that conclusion is the simple fact that I've done just a ton of research. I've spent the last day and a half at the Love Library going through Sandoz's records, and the Sandoz Heritage Society was very gracious in providing me with a stipend to come to the Heritage Center in Chatham and do some research there. They also helped with some editing for the book and all. So I've dug into her records, but I've also I spent basically the last 15 years. I appreciate the fact that Sandoz started researching and writing in what was the year?
1939.
39, yeah, and published in 53, and I started probably 2004, 2005, and published in 2019. So I appreciate that process. I can tell you this much: she's a much better researcher than I am. My eyes are still blurry from all the material that I've gone through. I've got another day tomorrow that I'll be up there, and then I'm going to the Nebraska Historical Society. But over the last several years, I've traveled the trail several times and have connected with people up and down the trail, and been out to all of the sites that we could find. Some of the southern sites are a little harder to find. As you get from Dodge City north, the sites are pretty well located, and you could get out there and They have the details of the battles and all the events pretty well laid out. When you get up around Oberlin, they are probably the most organized group along the trail, and they do an annual commemoration of the Cheyenne coming through, any Sapa days they call it. And I've been plugged in with them for a number of years now, and I've had the opportunity to go through through all of the settler records accounts of what happened, go through location by location by location, these events that happened, and very, very knowledgeable locals walked with me through there and explained the whole process. And there's a lot that happened there that it's hard. I understand it's hard to talk about, and we're talking about in sometime in the future, very near future, actually 2028 will be the 150th anniversary of this journey. But even before then, bringing some students and elders down through that part of the country and telling them the whole story, basically from Oklahoma all the way home. And when we get there, it's going to be a hard story to tell, but it needs to be told. And we need to have a full accounting for what happened there. And so that's part of what I'm trying to bring to the story as well. I call it, I've put in some button the chair, rubber on the road, boots on the ground research. And I know that's exactly what Mari did as well. So, so we have our similarities in our style, I think, and I'm so appreciative. I hope that you can tell that I have a great deal of respect for Mari Sandoz, the work that she's done, the book that she wrote about my people, the heart that she brought to it. As I sat and considered, this is a book discussion. So my hope is that we'll have a very robust discussion here, and that we can take the book is almost 70 years old. The question that I would first like to ask for people to consider is, how has it aged? I think that in this day and age, I think that's it's a kind of a hard-nosed question, but I think it's a very pertinent question to ask. How has the book aged and how it presents the Northern Cheyenne culture, how it relates one culture to another. How would it be received if it was written today? Kind of tough questions. I would like to lead off by saying that I think that there would be some challenges that it would face. Absolutely. I think that there was a time when Mari Sandoz would be called an advocate for the Northern Cheyenne. I think in today's terms, we would call her an ally. I think that it would be recognized, particularly by the Cheyenne people, that her heart is in the right place. But before I go too far into where I'm coming from, I think I've sat and pondered it myself for some time, and I've been hoping to hear some other thoughts about that from folks. How do you think it would be received today? How, you know, it's such a, I mean, there are so many different aspects to it, but just culturally speaking, would it be a, I want to say, would it be as well received, keeping in mind that it was rejected several times before it was published, but still it was in my mind a landmark book. It presented the Native perspective like it's never been presented before prior to that time, I don't think. And then, so that's been sitting in my heart, in my mind, is how would it be received today? And, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. Yeah.
I think it would be very well received because of the current climate with the Black culture fighting so hard, and the Indians have been kind of put off to the side. And I think it's time for their voice to be heard again.
A couple of questions.
Sure.
First, do you think basically Mari Sandoz got it right? She is writing about a culture of which she was not a part. But how would you answer that? And I have another question.
Okay. I think there are parts that she got absolutely right. I think there are parts that had she the advantage of technology and the material. I mean, the material that she went through was just voluminous. It was just incredible, the stuff that she's gone through. But there's so much more that has come forward since then. My gut feeling is that she would have used a lot of that information and it would have been received. If it had been published as it was in 1953, I think there probably would be some disagreement with parts of it.
Are you saying that there are resources she couldn't use or didn't have? And have you discovered new information about the Cheyenne outbreak through other history sources? I'd like to know what your main sources are.
Sure.
But are you saying that 70 years later or 50 years later, whatever it is, it's time to tell the story and you have new information?
Yeah, new information, different information, different perspectives. From it, I don't know. Well, for instance, I'll try to get something that's in the book. Well, for instance, simply the picture that she gives of Little Wolf is not Little Wolf. She went with what she had and what was identified to her as being Little Wolf, but it wasn't. There are several pictures. There's one from Fort Laramie, the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868. I don't know if she had access to that. I've not seen it in the records. There's the 1873 picture with dull knife that was taken in DC when they went back with the delegation. I don't know if she had access to that. I've not seen it in any of her records. What the person that she presented, I'm pretty sure inside profile is, I think it's Woodenlake. Actually, she talks about his pockmarked face, and he did not have a pockmarked face in any of those other pictures. There are also some pictures that George Winnell's wife took of him in old age. And you can see the similarities to his younger pictures. Just simple things like that. I have had access to the Tongue River Agency rolls, where when after Little Wolf shot starving elk at Fort Keel in Miles City, he moved down to be next to my great grandfather, Bill Rowland. So they lived very close to each other. So when the tribal censuses were taken from 1885 to 1890, their names are very close together on all the census material. Little Wolf's wives are listed as Lightning and Two Woman. And some of the historical record recognizes Two Woman as being his second wife. Lightning was my great-grandmother Sisfrog's sister. And those names are given throughout several years of census material. So she uses feather on head and fire. Now, they might be Lakota nicknames, Lakota names, just like Morningstar had Dull Knife. That very well might be. That very well might be. But given that, and those, the Lightning and Two Woman are the names that I use in my book. So it's not, I mean, I'm not saying that there's a ton of it, but there is new information that's coming forward over time that I think that had she had access to it, absolutely. I think she would have used it and all. The question I would have, and mind you, this is not my stance. This is not my stance on it, but I do know that there is a perspective out there that would see a non-native writing about natives as a type of appropriation, cultural appropriation. I would certainly be in Mari's corner on this one, because I think as I've expressed here, I think that she writes very strongly from a Cheyenne heart. I think that she was as immersed in this culture as I was, if not more, because she was closer to the original time period when this story happened than I was. So, so that's, I would absolutely say that she wrote from a Cheyenne heart, but the question remains, would the question still be raised about cultural appropriation? In other words, as was said earlier, it's important that the native story be told, and much of the native community, and myself included, it needs to be told by native people. The fact that Mari wrote this, and if she were to write it again today, as well as she did this, I would be supportive of it. There's two great books out. I'll only remember the name of one, I know. So You Want to Write Like a Native American. I think that's the title. Yvonne Mahisua is her name. And I'm not going to be able to quote her. I was going to bring the book with me, but I left it back at the room. She lays some pretty good guidelines out for if you're going to write about Native Americans, what do you need to pay attention to? And as you read through this, there's 2 or 3 paragraphs in a row of you need to immerse yourself in the culture. You need to talk to the elders. You need to research the history, know the history, the culture, the traditions. She did all that. Mari Sandoz did all of that. So in my mind, she has every right to write about it. The question I'm asking though is, how would it be received in the general population? And I think there would probably be some issue taken with it. So, yes.
I think a criticism that we can make about this work of Sandoz's, even in 1953 when it was published, is that she barely gets us to the 20th century of what's going on with the Northern Cheyenne people, to Little Wolf's death in 1904. But in all of her other works, she brings the storyline, both in her novels and her histories, she brings that storyline up to the point at which she's writing. And I think what she commits here is what so many white historians have committed wrongly in writing about indigenous peoples, is that they're only pigeonholed in the 19th century and they might as well be dead. They don't exist anymore, which is of course not true. But that's how she frames the story. There's no actual postscript. And we know that she was writing in her own contemporary times about the Northern Cheyenne in her letters and so forth. And so she wasn't committing that error universally in her life, but in the presentation of this story, if the reader only reads this book, they know nothing more about the Cheyenne life after the death of Little Wolf. And I don't think that's something she could definitely get away with today. There would have to be, the focus is on Little Wolf and Dull Knife, which I think she kind of characterized it in her early ideas of this book. It was kind of a dual biography. Even if that's what her purpose was, I think she would still have to continue on a bit into the remainder of the 20th and now the 21st centuries, illustrating what has happened to the Cheyenne people since.
I've got something from one of our online folks. She recently read Jerome Green's January Moon about the Northern Cheyenne breakout. She was shocked to see that he did not use any of Mari's collection to conduct any of his research. He had one sentence reference to Mari's semi-fictional book, Cheyenne Autumn. I understand your point that you don't agree with, that non-native researcher brings issues to the table, but do you think that her collection of interviews and maps still have value to future researchers on American Indian history?
Absolutely. I was just blown away by a couple of her maps here in the last 2 days. And they're going to be tremendous help to me with book 2 and book 3 as well. So yeah, no, and so the question about, and the comment I made about some people seeing this as cultural appropriation, I think it's a hard question and it needs to be asked, but this is a great follow-up question for that, because her material is relevant and her research is relevant and very, very helpful. And I've been to several conferences where different authors have talked about Cheyenne history, and it amazes me how in one part of the talk they will talk about Cheyenne Autumn in particular as being a work of fiction, But then they'll turn around and they'll cite Cheyenne Autumn and the accuracy of her research, Sandoz's research. So I think it's that along that same lines of there were heroes on both sides and there were fools on both sides. I think that Sandoz got a tremendous amount, and she was groundbreaking with her research. The way that she did it, she had access to actual participants, and then through her father Jules, some of the older folks who were on that journey as well. So she had primary resources that nobody else had. Nobody else had. And how can that not be relevant? Well, that's the and again, my eyes are just coming back into focus from having spent the last day and a half looking at her maps and her note cards and all of that, and just gathering so much information off of them for not only for my next book, but I'm involved in 2 or 3 other projects related to this story with the Northern Cheyenne tribe. I'm participating on a it's called the Cheyenne Healing Trail Committee, and we are in the process of planning and developing and building a commemorative trail that goes from the barracks where they broke out of at Fort Robinson to the monument that we've built at the base of the buttes. It's a 3.5 mile trail. And this is the first place I stopped to do the research for that, because I knew that she had access to all this information. And I'll be bringing a lot of the information that I gleaned from here back to that committee. And these are tribal members, along with a lot of partners from different agencies in Nebraska and around the region. Also involved in at an early, very early beginning of an effort to have this trail recognized as a National Historic Trail. And a lot of this research that I've gathered from my time here will be put toward that. In fact, one of her maps that I discovered yesterday gave me very specific locations for the 2 skirmish sites down in southwestern Kansas that I spent 2 days with a descendant of Charles Goodnight walking around that country trying to find these skirmish sites. And I can tell you what's happening in southwestern Kansas is what's happening up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. We're losing a generation of storytellers, and we're losing the story. Sandoz has captured it, and she has it in some incredible records. So yeah, it's relevant. It's going to be used. And I hope that I use it right and in a good way. Yeah.
I think you should put some blame on the publisher or not printing maps. They found a lot of them, and I follow the maps, and it was hard to do, and it could have been done better. And that's the publisher's onus.
Yeah, this particular map, I don't know. Well, I suppose she could have. I would be hard pressed to know how to put it into a copy of a book that I'm doing. It's basically a very detailed topo map, and it gets right down. So when the maps Sandoz uses in her book are very good. They're showing the different trails going up and
There's one page.
Well, yeah.
And the cover was intriguing. They could include that in the text.
Yeah. So room for improvement.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that different people learn in different ways. And I was frustrated particularly because I could not relate to a map of the United States. Okay.
Mm,
from Oklahoma.
I can tell you that where I'm plugged into some really incredible people from Oklahoma all the way up through. My last trip was at the end of June, and I can tell you that the enthusiasm all along the trail is through the roof. The National Park Service has done a preliminary white paper to identify those trails related to the Plains Indian Wars that are most likely or most adaptable to being recognized as a National Historic Trail, and this is one of the top 5. They said that actually the top 5 all come in pretty evenly, weighed pretty evenly. Yeah, and they've done all the research on it, preliminary research on it, and so and I've been in contact with Tiana Limpy, who is the Northern Cheyenne Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, about starting this process, and she's excited about it as well. So if we can get all the players going and get the studies started that we need to get started. Of course, we'll probably need to find some funding along the way, but I'm one of those that I'll trust if you do things in a good way, good things will happen. And so that's what we're going to try to do. Yes.
This book is about Cheyennes, but there are also other tribes in there.
Yes.
Sioux.
Right.
Yes, yeah, and some of them are hard for me to pronounce, but so are these tribes working with you when you say that it's exciting things going on from Fort Robinson, those 3 miles or so? Are the other tribes participating?
At this point, no, this is a Northern Cheyenne, the Northern Cheyenne Breakout Committee is the official name of the committee that I'm part of. And it was formed by a resolution from the Northern Cheyenne tribe. We do have a member who is both Northern Cheyenne and Lakota. And he can trace his lineage back to the people involved in the breakout. But at this point, no, we don't have any Arapaho or Lakota. Yeah. And given that it is the Northern Cheyenne breakout, it's the Lakota were very sympathetic and did everything that they could to help and wanted to help more, but it is the story of the Northern Cheyenne primarily. In my book, I tell the story of Cheyenne interaction with Ogallala, which is not what Sandoz says it was. I do not mention the Arapaho. I do mention them in the back pages, simply because I feel like it's a matter of respect. I need to mention them, and that they were involved in it, but I'm focusing primarily on the Northern Cheyenne people in my mind, and with this committee as well.
Gerry, I think we might conclude here at this point. This has been a great discussion. And Gerry is going to stay here for a while for one-on-one visits if you would like, as well as his book is here if you would like to purchase it. And we have some other Sandoz books for everybody as well. And the monographs you are free to take. They're over there on our table. And we have to thank you for your work and being here with us tonight. We appreciate it so much. Got a chair for you to sit and visit with people. If that's good, please feel free to do that.